Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome back for this week's episode of What the Future, the College of Liberal Arts Career Coaching webinar series. My name is Kelsey Schultz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Career Education Manager for the College of Liberal Arts. Today's topic is about storytelling your skills and talking about yourself, which I am so excited about because I personally have a background in improv comedy and storytelling showcases. I know that it takes a lot of courage to share your story, and everyone's experience is unique. So we'll talk about some sky-high level concepts of storytelling and then how you can actually apply those. So let's dive in. As I mentioned before, the principles of community are really important. I've put the Career Center's mission statement down at the bottom. So I think it's important to talk about the mission of the Career Center and how CSU's principles of community align with us overall. In this webinar, we're going to come back to these principles, but we do have identity-based and equity-based resources and approach to the work that we do in career development overall. With that being said, today's focus is going to be about storytelling. So we'll do just some different components of storytelling. There's a million different perspectives out there. This is just one of them. I think it'll be a lot of fun because we'll do some brainstorming activities for each of the components that you might want to get some content generated for your stories. And then where the heck do I tell those stories and what are the formats I should consider, plus some resources and action steps. Again, there are so many different ways to talk about your story. These are just things that I came up with in my head of some major components that would be relevant as you think about your future self and telling your story to the folks like your family and friends, like that Uncle Joe that's like, so what are you gonna do with that degree? That guy. When you talk to employers and you're finding lots of different opportunities, or graduate schools if you're applying to grad school. So again, just pieces to think about as you think about that future self. So with career goals and future contributions, yeah, it's important to know where you're going. What experience are you looking for? What's next? How do you want to contribute to the world? Lots of students that I talk to want to find meaningful work. So this is one way that we break that down with some reflection questions of where are you headed next? That's usually the big question for students. We also need to talk about how our identities impact our career selves. You're a human being. You have a whole story and life experiences that shape how you see the world and the world sees you. Historically, there are certain communities that have been marginalized time and time again, and it's still present day happening. And that's going to influence potentially your interests or your skill sets and the talents that you bring, which leads to the next piece. Your values and your talents. Usually people enjoy the things that they're really good at. So that's why I talk about talents and interests together. This might also influence what motivates you. So what are your values and things that matter to you? And that's an important component of your story. And lastly, your competencies. Okay, but like, what can I do with this degree, right? Like, how do I talk about the value of a liberal arts degree when I don't even know what I can do with it or where I'm going? And that's important so that you can be flexible, especially during a time period when you need to be flexible with industries and what you think you can do, and articulating a coherent story for whatever opportunity that is. And like I said, overall, this is how I typically coach students on the tell me about yourself question. So if we were to package all this together as a sample, and I was said, tell me about yourself and why you're interested in this experience or this opportunity, it's kind of these components of what am I seeking? So I'm like, well, I'm looking for X experience, and here's why that matters to me, but like, here's why I'm prepared for that. What led you to that? So why do you care about this? Why does it matter to you? What experience, like the story of the experiences and how they led you to where you are now? And why this particular place? Why this organization? Why this position or experience? And why now rather than in a year or two? Or how are they going to play how do you want this organization to play a part in your story? And those connect the dots. So like I said, we'll talk about how to prep for those questions and just one framework for looking at those things. First, the career question, right? What is your next career step or transition other than graduation? So we need to get clear on this because whether we're talking to an employer or a family member or we're going into a search engine, we have to be clear about, am I going to grad school? Is it a part-time job, full-time job, all those pieces, but what are we looking for? Are we trying to figure it out? Do we have it figured out, etc.? And then something to think about if you're like, but I don't know what I want to do. That's totally okay. Something that might help you break that down a little bit is, what's an issue in the world that you want to address? Like, what are problems that you think about and it energizes you, that you're like, ooh, I like that. I want to do that. Or, ooh, I'm a nerd for logic and I want to work through policies or something, right? So like, what's something that energizes you? That could be a population. It could be a cause. It could be anything that resonates with you. There's no judgment there. I have some folks who are like, I really like organizational problems. I'm like, boo, get on Marie Kondo and let's look at some careers in that realm. That's totally okay, right? And then lastly, identities and your social context. So we're kind of in a unique context right now, right? We have to pay attention to what is going on in the world and where do I fit within it? And part of that question of where do I fit in the world is your identity. So something I want y'all to think about is, how have your identities shaped your future or your perception of your future, right? Like, what are some skills you've gained from navigating everyday life just being you? And how did your identities impact your interests, like your life experiences? Those are important things to think about. So I'm going to pause this, and I want us to take 2 minutes to individually reflect, and then we would go into breakout rooms to talk about it more. Okay, so we just had an incredible conversation about this second question. Sometimes it's hard to realize how your identities might influence your future self. Something that we talked a little bit about was maybe sometimes if someone has, for example, if someone has if they're bicultural, they might prioritize not centering a white hetero male in a narrative if they're a writer, right? So that could be a perspective that they bring, like, ooh, that's a motivating piece for them as a storyteller. Or for me, for example, like, I have an invisible disability. I have ADHD. And so growing up, I thought it was really like I didn't belong, right? Like, I think everyone can think of, but particularly folks with marginalized identities can think of experiences where they were told they didn't matter or they didn't belong. And so when we think about our career goals and our values as they shape those, like what impact we want to have, for me as a career coach, I know I really prioritize equity. I really prioritize making people feel validated and finding spaces where students can feel like they're heard from more than they're heard about. So keeping that in mind, there might be some hidden pieces there that you're like, I didn't even know that could influence my story. But keep those reflection points going, because when we start with that past and we look at the future, there's some strong connections there that maybe you'll articulate with more time too. Okay. But with that in mind, I'm a huge fan. I've mentioned this on other webinars. I'm a huge fan of Marie Kondo, who does the magic of tidying up on Netflix. I'm also a Clifton Strengths Gallup certified strengths coach. So I always see through the lens of talents in particular. So something I want y'all to think about and maybe write down is, think about a time in the last year, whether it was a class project, something you're involved in on campus, or something in an internship or a job, ideally one of those three, that you were in the zone. Like, you were like, oh my gosh, I could do this all day long. I am on fire. Like, this is amazing. I could do it all day. And where you were in the zone, or that you were like, oh my gosh, I have so much joy sparking, right? Like, I can't get enough. This is amazing. I had that moment just a minute ago when we were having a conversation about identities. So yeah, like, think about that moment. And I want you to write down the specifics. What were you doing? Who were you with? And why do you think it sparked joy for you? What were maybe some talent clues that you saw there? Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes to just write that down and reflect on that question. Awesome. So something that we talked about when folks were writing is that it's often hard to determine what your talents are because they come to you so naturally. You do it all the time. Everybody must think this way, right? But it also takes a lot of courage to claim those talents. So identifying, like naming, claiming, and then aiming those talents to actually help you in your everyday life. That's a lifelong journey. And also you can get some Clifton Strengths coaching from us in the Career Center if you do want to develop that more. But with that in mind, it's important to write down those talents. And it's, like I said, it takes a lot of courage to own them. Sometimes students that I talk to say, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to offer, or I feel like I'm being cocky by bragging about myself, right? Like, this is bragging. And this is just telling a true story of something that happened, something that you were proud of, and that's okay. It can involve other people. It can not involve other people. This is just the best of you, and we're telling an honest story, and that's okay. If we were trying to shut other people down and be like, your sparks of joy was dumb, like that is not, right? That's not effective. That's when it gets into that dangerous, arrogant category. But there's a lot of code switching that particularly women and women of color do that isn't necessary when you're talking about yourself in the best parts of your story. So just keep that in mind as you move forward of what are things that light you up when you talk about it, because people notice and they want to ask you more. That's what makes you memorable. But what experiences count? So this is the application part of the presentation where we're like, okay, but what experiences do I demonstrate these competencies with? Now, relevant coursework or class projects, paid and unpaid experiences, all these things on this list are valid. It's just anything that can demonstrate your competency. And sometimes students who have, again, different identities, like maybe they've had to support their family in different ways, or maybe English wasn't the first language spoken at home, and so they had to help translate things, right? That's still developing a competency, and that's valid. So you're not going to put that on a resume, but you can talk about that in an interview or as you're catching up with an interviewer before your session. So keep those stories in mind because they're all valid. It's just, okay, now where do I put them and what does it look like? So we're going to start with resumes. Resumes. So these are two very random samples of resumes. It's the exact same experience. It just looks a little bit different because this person is applying for marketing positions or working at a nonprofit. So it's the exact same experience. It's just organized a little bit differently, right? Now this student happens to have a lot of experience, right? Like they have a couple internships, they worked on campus, they've got some great relevant skills. So I know that that's not the truth for every student on campus, but I encourage you to use the class project section and emphasize those. The biggest thing that matters with resumes, and Sam can attest to this as well, is that we really need to maximize your keywords. So when employers are looking for the story you're telling, it's important that you pull up the actual position description that you're applying for, and you make sure that you reflect the keywords there. So someone said that they struggle with making a general resume. Just make one resume with no sections on it, except experience, right? Put experience and put all the things in there, and maybe involvement, put all the things in there. And then you can change your resume depending on what you're applying for. So you'll notice on the one on the right, it says relevant experience. Excellent. You can literally put anything you want in there. It's not paid experience. It's not paid experience. It's whatever experience, whether it's on campus, off campus, etc. And if you have a relevant experience section, you can change that around in a flash, and it can be really flexible. That's going to be really important during this job search period during COVID, because you might have to apply for things that you never expected you would. And you'll have a resume that's dynamic and easy to change so that you can be ready for that position and it won't take you an hour to recreate a resume. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, it's not just the format, it's the bullet points, right? So the keywords are important in those little bullet points, and it might be a little tweak. But if you're like, but what are the bullet points? What goes into them? Yeah, well, each bullet point that you saw, and I'll go back, each bullet point under the sections that you saw have this formula. Action verb plus the competency, those competencies that we went over, right? Like it emphasizes some of those competencies, and the result. Now, as you're making a draft resume to get started, use the competency list as it feels natural to you. But eventually, when you do start actively applying, tweak the competency keywords just a little bit. So maybe if it says like build relationships with 3 to 4 preschoolers to facilitate curriculum. Great. Maybe if the position description says build rapport with 3rd graders and do this, you'd be like, okay, I build rapport, right? So it's a little tweak that should take no more than like 5 minutes for you to tweak that content, but can go a long way for applicant tracking systems that are looking for the percentage of keywords that match your resume and the position description. Okay. Also, cover letters. So again, we have entire workshops about cover letters, so I'm not going to go too in depth. But if you're wondering, okay, you just made me write down all these stories, where am I putting them? your talents, your competencies, all of those things are getting reflected into these different components, right? Now you just know the formula for how each story is told, whether it's an action verb was in a bullet point, or if it's a cover letter. So for example, the first paragraph of a cover letter, I call the movie trailer. Like, why should I care? What are you telling me? How did you find out? Tell me what's up. So that's when you list the position, the source, and why you're interested. After this, I'm going to go to our website so you can see the sample cover letter handout and resume handout to get the more in-depth notes. But it's your sparks of joy story and career goals connected. So those stories, that's where that fits. Your middle two paragraphs, you're doing the same thing, except you're connecting your competency stories with your sparks of joy story to be like, here's my career goal, here's why this is relevant, what I can do and why I'm interested in this. And your final paragraph is the Kim Possible one, where you're like, call me, beat me if you want to reach me, right? You say, thank you, here's how you can contact me, and I look forward to hearing from you for an interview. Awesome. So with all that in mind, lastly is interviews. Okay, now again, I know that I'm doing a sky-high overview of these concepts, but it is important to pay attention to. As you think about behavioral interview questions, so like tell me about a time when, or describe a situation where, that's a behavioral interview question. We approach those questions with something called the STAR model. Also, it's the content you prepared when you thought about your competencies, when you thought about, ooh, what's a talent that I have, and you infuse those pieces into your response, right? So as you can see here, situation, task, action, result. So situation, if I said, tell me about a time when you had to resolve an issue with a class project. You could say, okay, well, here's the class, here was the project, here's what I needed to do. This is how I addressed it. And you talk about how you leveraged your talents and your sparks of joy to really address it. And then lastly, why was it awesome? Or what did I learn? And most importantly, therefore, as the blah, blah, blah at blah, blah, blah company, I know that I would provide what, right? Like I know that I would provide a unique lens to problem solving that would honor individuals, including their identities. And I can make some great social media content because of that. Again, depending on the role and the competencies you're going to be translating to. Great. If you're like, but how do I prepare for that? I highly encourage you to use Big Interview, okay? So Big Interview, you can record yourself doing a mock interview. That's important because as excited and confident as you feel right now telling these stories, it's important that you maybe write out some ideas and practice saying it out loud, especially in a virtual environment when online interviews are going to be more common. So something to keep in mind. So Big Interview is a great resource for that, and I'm going to show you where to find the cover letter handout, the resume handout, and Big Interview on the website. I'm going to pause for questions. Awesome. Okay, so now we're on the Career Center website. We're going to talk about the virtual career conference in just a moment, but if you want to get more in-depth resources on resumes, what? There's a whole button just for that right here on resumes. So Resume Guide walks you through some of the more specific components of resumes and some more samples. We also have the cover letter guide here. Or if you want to do a CV, it's not super different from a resume, but it is important. And so it's good to check out the CV guide. Like I said, Resume Guide is here. This is what it looks like. It walks you through different samples. It's pretty helpful. If you run into any snags though, I highly encourage you to go to a virtual drop-in so that way you can get more hands-on support. For the cover letter, I have mixed feelings about the sample cover letter we have. I don't encourage you to put bullet points in your cover letter, but I do love this portion of the cover letter handout, which talks about how do you prepare your story, right? So again, as I mentioned for each of the paragraphs, this walks you through exactly how to do it. And guess what? You already created some content for this, so it's gonna take you 2 seconds, which is great. But again, use that position description to really shape your content so that you can get through those applicant tracking. And again, this is really helpful. I just don't want you to use bullet points in your cover letter. That's it. But this is an overall excellent guide. All right. So going back to our slides, that is some different ways that you can prepare to tell your story. Again, just some unique content that I think students struggle to come up with because they're like, I don't know how to talk about myself. I don't have anything to say. Boo, you have so much to offer to the world. That's okay. And if you're like, but I want more in-depth practice with it, beyond those handouts you showed me, you should go to the virtual career conference. So I will actually be moderating the majority of sessions for the Learn portion of the virtual career conference. So if we go back to the Career Center website right here, if you're like, but where do I register? How do I find sessions? Okay, let's click and find the virtual career conference right here. And I will include a link to it in the YouTube description for this video. But the virtual career conference, it's happening. It's happening next week from Tuesday to Thursday, and the following week from Tuesday to Thursday. So the last 2 weeks of April from Tuesday to Thursday. And we have a whole bunch of sessions for you. So we have alumni panel. We've got how to improve your application materials, so the tangible hands-on, resilience in uncertain times. So basically that one's about how do I deal with rejection? That's really that session. And again, when and if to attend grad school will be the next What the Future webinar. So we're joining the virtual career conference, which is exciting. We're also having a financial advisor who's the director of financial education from Canvas coming to speak to you about how to make a budget and how to prepare for financial uncertainties. So that's amazing. It's called Let's Talk About Money. And again, perspectives for seniors who are graduating, whether they're undergrad or grad, come on out. We have 4 career coaches standing by who can share their perspectives and advice for navigating the next few stages. And the week after will be international and global job searching. So all you have to do is click on the session that you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. You click RSVP for this event, and then it sends you the registration link. So you get an automatic email that invites you, and you have all the information you need, which is awesome. Okay, so keep that in mind. Please register for sessions again. They're next week, but we're really excited about this content, and we think you'll get a lot out of it. Oh, I forgot to mention, the last week of the conference, this is the first week of the conference. The last week of the conference is when employers are coming. So hiring employers who have opportunities open between now and August 2020 are coming. They're doing an informational interview the first half, and the second half of the half hour is when you get to ask questions and learn about their opportunities. So network, 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 and practice telling your story with them. Okay, so please come out to the conference. I'll be there. Okay, like I said, there's lots of sessions to register for. If you're like, but I only want to hang out with What the Future, great, boo. We're going to be joining the virtual career conference. So you can find out the information here, but it'll be if and when to attend grad school and global international job searching. You have to register through Handshake this time. Okay, and then, like I said, we still have virtual virtual drop-ins and appointments available to you. If you have any questions about any of these topics, just pop on in, 15 minutes, we've got you, or sign up for a 45-minute appointment with Sam or me. Additional resources. So we have a lot going on campus. One that I added here is there is an FAQ page for international students and scholars on that page. It goes through incredible resources about again, what to do with a visa, OPT, CPT, etc. So please check that out if those are some of the questions that you're considering. And action planning. So I would love to know, what is one thing that you're going to do for your career development by Sunday? And what is one session that you'll sign up for the virtual career conference? All right, so keep in mind what you're going to do to help you prepare to tell your story. It takes a lot of courage to share who you are and what you're looking for. And we might face rejection, even though you prepared as much as possible. And that's totally sucks, right? Rejection is super painful. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily your fault. We're in an uncertain, there's a lot of uncertainties right now. And the important thing is to make sure that you get as prepared as possible and that you know you're not alone. We have so many resources for you. We have an entire community that's got your back. And also know that once you graduate, we're not just letting you loose. You actually have access to me as your career education manager for an entire year after you graduate. And then we have an alumni career coach who's available after that year. So you are not alone. We've got your back, and we're going to be here for a while. We're not going anywhere. Okay. So if you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. You can comment on this YouTube link once it's a YouTube link, or you can email me directly. There's my email, Kelsey.Schultz@colostate.edu. We'll be back next week at the virtual career conference. I will also be on Instagram this Monday for a career Q&A. So if you want to ask me anything on there, it's the College of Liberal Arts CSU Instagram, and I will be answering your career questions there if you're like, I just want to go on Instagram. But thanks for watching, and just go change the world. That's it.